everyone, Hamer back with another installment of the big Mission Impossible episode ranking list. We're into the top 40 now, and this one will cover 40 through 31. Without further ado, let's just go with it. Starting with number 40, Season 3, Episode 5, The Execution. The IMF must take down Louis Parma, who is taking over the food distribution industry through underhanded means and is poised to do more damage to the economy. I don't really love this episode as much as many others do. The framing device of a mobster trying to corner the food market is an extremely lame one. This is a deliberately slow episode which is necessary to the plot and the point of the story that the writers want to tell. Maybe that's what turns me off a little bit. I prefer a more brisk pace myself. But the bigger problem here is that the writers are obviously hell-bent on beating the audience over the head with their feelings about the death penalty. They are perfectly within their rights to do that, and I mentioned this in my full review. But the episode suffers because of it. The execution, pun intended, of the episode by the cast is great. I have zero complaints with that. My problem is that the writers very clearly put all their effort into what happens in the episode after Hitman Vic Duchel, who is the main target of the episode, wakes up on the IMF's death row set. And all of the establishing action that happened before that scene gets very short shrift, in my opinion. That's the problem with this one. However, this one is better than all of the previous episodes I've listed because it has an excellent Power of Five vibe. All of the team does a great job here. Luke Askew as Vic Duchel gives a great performance as the death row inmate, as does Martin Landau. This is a tour de force for him as Duchel's partner on death row. Number 39, Season 4, Episode 14, The Falcon. General Ramon Sabatini has imprisoned his country's ruler, Prince Stefan, and faked his death in an effort to seize power. The IMF must stop him and rescue Stefan, his fiancée Francesca, and her cousin Nikolai. This is the show's only three-parter. It is a great way to introduce the show to a casual fan. The focus is on saving the royal family. That's an easy thing to keep track of, even for a child. John Vernon as Sabatini, of course, carries the story as he always does when he's on the show. I cannot put this one up in the elite group that is coming because of the internal weirdness and inconsistencies of the story. It's difficult to believe that the IMF is able to pull all of this action off in one specifically planned day, taking into account how many people would react to their machinations. It's weird that for what is essentially a royal wedding, they have a magic act as entertainment. Yeah, that's weird. Paris actually takes the place of Prince Nikolai at one point, and after the IMF pulls some things and the beloved Francesca dies, Paris, as Nikolai, acts normally, not showing his grief, barely hours later. So there's a lot of weirdness going on here. You can suspend your disbelief and enjoy it. I do. I thoroughly do enjoy this episode. But it's not quite up at the top because of issues like I've mentioned. There's a fair bit of lameness, too, in some of the antagonists, such as Colonel Vargas, who's also involved, kind of working for himself, working with Sabatini when convenient and against him when it's not. And the IMF is frankly concomitantly lame in not properly anticipating what some of the antagonists, such as Vargas, will do when they're really, really pressed. However, this episode is better than the lower ones because Visually, it is a very impressive episode. The power of 5 is on display throughout, as Lee Merriweather plays a very significant role as the guest female agent in this one. John Vernon, as I mentioned, is outstanding as always. The other guest stars are great too. And the writers are able to sustain the suspense of the episode throughout the extended action. Not easy to do when you have to, fill so much time at the cost of some of the plot holes. Still, it's a very entertaining couple of hours to watch. Number 38, Season 7, Episode 10, Ultimatum. The IMF must locate and disarm a bomb that will kill millions unless the president agrees to several political demands. I like this one. I think it works. I think it poses a challenge worthy of an elite team like the IMF. The ending may seem like a foregone conclusion. It always has to be, when you have a premise such as this one. And the ending does have the kind of artificial suspense required for such situations. But the path to get there is not typical at all. The episode, it definitely plods a little bit here and there at times, no question, but it's not boring at all. There's no doubt about that. Murray Hamilton, the actor, is good. He's Jerome Cooper, the main antagonist in a sense. Unfortunately, the Jerome Cooper character is a bit one-dimensional in this one. He has to spend most of the episode just being frustrated and cooped up because of circumstances that the IMF create, making the subplot involving his other cohorts far more interesting in terms of the actual action of the episode. But that's what keeps the episode going and interesting. This one is better because of Madeline Rue as Adele Cooper, Jerry's wife. She is awesome. She is a shining star throughout this episode. It is a decent, cogent story. As I mentioned, it's worthy of the IMF to tackle. Some might consider some aspects of it to be kind of hokey. Okay, it is a little bit. I'll grant you that. I get it if that's how you feel. But it's a fun episode. The ending is fun. Despite being a little bit predictable, it's entertaining to watch, and that's why it's here. Number 37, Season 5, Episode 12, Squeeze Play. Mob boss Albert Zembra is dying of cancer and is preparing to hand his operation and information to a successor. The IMF must get his records and put an end to the operation. This is another episode with an outstanding incidental character in Albert's granddaughter Eve, who ends up being the focus of the episode. Her presence and mannerisms just fit the plot, and it's great because the story doesn't require her character to have an agenda. So many of these kinds of stories have that just kind of keeps us guessing about a character's motivations. That's not the case here with Eve. The writers tried to set Paris up in other situations where he could have a romance, and they tended not to work for that reason. You never kind of knew what he was getting into, and the focus wasn't more about the relationship or the interplay between Paris and the lady. It was more about what was going on behind the scenes. But here, this one works. Victoria Vetri, who plays Eve, her charisma is able to make it lively, more realistic, more enjoyable. Albert Paulson is Albert Zembra. He raises the rating a few notches. We have a character, Carlos, played by Nico Minardos. He unfortunately brings it down. Not his fault, but his character, I feel, doesn't really add much to this episode. He's basically marked for death from the outset, and because I guess the interplay between Paris and Eve works so well, it kind of pushes Carlos away from being more meaningful to the main plot. This one is better because of Albert Paulson, but mostly because of Victoria Vetri as Eve. The scenes between Paris and Eve are great. They have great chemistry on scene, especially the ending scene where she reveals that she knows what's going on. She's not just the damsel in distress. She's not just the dumb, pretty girl who's an airhead. She's intelligent, and she knows what's happening around her. She makes us care about her misfortune of being torn between two worlds. Increasingly, as we get higher in the list, I'll talk about when a character, usually a woman, that's how it turns out, will make us really feel and care for her. And evoking that emotion is really, really powerful when it works and works well, and Ms. Vetri makes it work here. Number 36, Season 4, Episode 2, The Numbers Game. The IMF must stop General Rados Golan, who used to be the ruler of now democratic Luxania, from staging a revolution with his ill-gotten funds. This one is another end-of-the-world facade to uncover information. The antagonists are thoroughly unlikable. May Britt as Madame Golan, she's pretty, she fills her gold digger role well. Unfortunately, doesn't really get to add much to the show for me. Don Franks as Golan's general has a better outing this time than a game of chess, which he was in, and not really saying much. The focus here is on the story. It's not really so much on the antagonists and their characters. It's on the story itself and the IMF manipulation of the situation. And for years, I missed the fact that the IMF shouldn't have had too much trouble cracking Golan's computer to get his code, which makes the whole thing a bit of an excuse plot. However, this one is better because it's a really fun episode from an action standpoint. It's got great teamwork, including Willie and Tracy in very important roles that they often don't get. And the bunker and where most of the action of the episode takes place, and the elevator that kind of, goes between the bunker and the house. It's almost like a separation of worlds, and it's almost like a character and part of the story. And I love it as the elevator is almost like a plot device that really adds to this episode. And of course, the scene at the end where the antagonists realize that their money is gone is just absolutely priceless. I love ending scenes like that where the show goes out with a bang. Number 35, Season 4, Episode 3, The Controllers. The IMF must stop Dr. Carl Turek, who is working on a mind-controlled drug that threatens the free world. This one has a great supporting cast and is a decent premise for an episode, but you have to suspend your disbelief, of course, that a temporary mind-controlled drug that works as described here could actually exist. It's a problem for most episodes involving such gimmicks. I've mentioned many of them before. They're down near the bottom of the list, where we have, hypnosis and subliminal suggestion to make people do things that they ordinarily wouldn't do. If such things really worked, of course, you'd have a much easier time achieving your goal than would fill a 1 hour, or in this case, a 2 hour drama. Part of the episode even puts a lampshade on this. In terms of, the whole hokiness of the premise of the episode. But I will definitely give this one credit for not being your typical 1 hour plot that gets stretched out. This one is packed with logical action and a sensible story, even if the premise is a bit lame. Leonard Nimoy takes a bit of a back seat in this one, but otherwise the teamwork is really, really good. It's better because of a lot of different reasons. First of all, we have Dina Merrill as the guest female agent. She does a really decent job. She gets a good deal of screen time, but it's not wasted, and she fits the role really well here of the scientist who's, who has a thing going on with Dr. Turek. There's an outstanding guest cast. David Shiner as Dr. Turek, Alfred Ryder, Robert Ellenstein. We're talking real great quality actors here. Even H.M. Wynant as Lorkner, the creepy assistant to Dr. Turek, and Brooke Bundy as the lovely Catherine, who is an unfortunate kind of test subject for Turek's experiments. Even she's great, despite having almost no dialogue in this one. I'll give the writers credit for creating a story where the subplot of Lorkner and Catherine is not just padding, but it actually dovetails into the main plot, and it sets up the need for the IMF to have to adjust their plan in part 2. So rather than taking away from the main plot, it adds to it, and that's a really nice touch. Number 34, Season 1, Episode 8, The Ransom. In the first personal mission, mobster Frank Egan kidnaps the daughter of Dan Briggs's friend and will kill her unless Briggs and the IMF can deliver informant Augie Gorman to him. This one is a lot of fun, although it is a bit slow at times. It's a showcase for Stephen Hill as Dan Briggs, of course, meaning that the other agents take a bit of a back seat here. But it's a quality plot with many IMF techniques that will be used over the years, especially the idea of the IMF getting others to do what they can't do themselves. In this case, since they can't get Gorman from the police, they find a way to get the police to unwittingly hand him over, which is a type of subtle planning that is so important over the years in future episodes. So it's a bit of a seminal episode in that way. This one is better than the previous ones because this is Stephen Hill's finest hour without question. I totally believe, the way that he plays Dan Briggs here, it makes us believe that when Briggs is pushed, he will give no quarter and will be totally dedicated to whatever it is he wants to achieve. And it's so great the way Stephen Hill plays him in this episode. Also, William Smithers is outstanding as Frank Egan, the bad guy with nothing to lose. I've always loved William Smithers as an actor, and he's fantastic here. Number 33, Season 1, Episode 10, The Carriers. The IMF must infiltrate and neutralize an enemy facility where agents are being trained to spread a plague in the United States. This early one is quite contrived at many levels and a bit scientifically inaccurate, but it works. It's a very fine outing for the first season, and it's the first major misdirection play that is so frequently used over the years. The IMF as an elite force doesn't just have to take out a bunch of villains and go in with guns or whatever. They have to do things in a very specific way in order to complete the mission. Rollin takes the leadership role, as he'll have to do several times later in the season because of circumstances that happened with Stephen Hill and Dan. The villains aren't pushovers, but there's a lot of lameness amongst them, which is why I feel that this one doesn't have the degree of difficulty that it could had the villains been more formidable. That's a bit of a downer in this episode, at least from my perspective. But despite the villains being a little bit lame, this is a great quality mission, as I mentioned. George Takei is a great guest, and his presence as Roger, the bacteriologist, makes perfect sense in this one. Great addition to the team. And it's also great to see Landau being pushed to the fore. This is a really entertaining hour all around, and that's why it's up here at number 33. Number 32, Season 3, Episode 8, The Diplomat. Important information about U.S. defenses has fallen into the enemy hands and is in the process of being confirmed by an agent named Roger Toland. The IMF must make the enemy's ambassador, Yetkov, believe the information is false. I never liked this episode very much until I watched it again recently and got past the smarm of Fernando Lamas as Roger Toland. This is a very logical plot. It's got some minor continuity blips, but the producers made great use of Lee Grant as the guest agent. I mentioned in the main review, and I'll repeat here, she's positioned as somebody who is already part of the Washington political scene, which is why she, is known by Roger Toland in the first place. Had Barbara Bain, she was away because of a salary dispute or something along those lines, had she been in this episode, the writers would have had to contrive a story to kind of shoehorn her into that position, and it wouldn't have made as much sense. It would have taken away from the story had that happened. So they took advantage of an opportunity here, and that's good. My only complaint with the episode is that it's slow and plotty at times. Some of that is deliberate. Some of that is necessary because of the way that Roger Toland goes about his business. And Lee Grant, despite the fact that she's a wonderful actress, her character is basically just a damsel in distress here. It's kind of one-dimensional. I don't know how they could have done more with her character, but I really wish that they had, and I feel that they could have, although I'm a little bit hard-pressed to come up with specifics. Schmuckery is totally avoided in this one, and the team earns their win here, which is why this is up at number 32. This one is better because it's a unique story. Just about all of the stories that we're going to talk about now on the upper end of the list are unique in their own way. This one certainly fits that category of being unique. It has a great guest cast, not just Fernando Lamas and Lee Grant. It's got Sid Haig. It's got Alfred Ryder, who is always in great episodes, whether it's because of him or just because that's just how it goes. And it's got a fitting and satisfying ending, which is perfect, in my opinion, for the plot. And, of course, Fernando Lamas as Roger Toland is a quality villain worthy of being an IMF antagonist. Number 31, Season 1, Episode 20, The Legend. The IMF must take down a group of Nazis who are assembling in South America after finishing their World War II jail sentences. This is a really fun episode from beginning to end. There is genuine suspense in the first act when Dan gets moderately electrocuted trying to find out what's going on and discovers that there is apparently a Martin Bormann who's still alive. It's the first time in the series that things don't go exactly to plan in an episode. In a situation where the team had time in advance to prepare. They did have other problems earlier. But this is the first time we've seen that oh gosh, they certainly got caught flat-footed there, huh? And it requires improvisation and a rethink, which is great. The main target is Friedrich Rudd, of course, played by Gunnar Hellstrom, who is extremely engaging, but also quite lame, and ends up hoisted wonderfully by his own petard at the end. He turns himself into a schmuck. But boy, he's entertaining as he does it. It's a bit of a shame that Rudd's Bormann dummy is unrealistic, even by 1960 standards. It makes the other characters seem a bit lame and silly for believing that it's real, but I guess that's what they needed to do in order to make the plot work. This one is better because absolutely the best moment of season 1, without question, is the look on Gunnar Hellstrom's face when Roland Hand comes into the living room of the chateau as Martin Bormann and starts countermanding his orders, and he can't do anything about it. It's that final act of this episode is just so great. I can watch that again and again and again. And a really underrated aspect of this episode, I used to think that this part of it was kind of slow and boring. But there are a lot of scenes where Cinnamon, as the daughter of one of the Nazis, played by Dan, she manipulates Rudd in such a simple, basic, and primal way. Because once the IMF and Cinnamon realize that, okay, this guy's trying to set himself up to be another Hitler, she takes the role of saying, well, okay, I'm going to be your Eva Braun. And it's just so well done. Barbara Bain has done such tremendous work on this series, but this one, for her fans, it's really, really unrelated. Underrated, I should say. Sorry, underrated. Watch her in this one. Just pay attention to her scenes, and you'll see exactly what I mean. I had this one much higher up before, but in the end, Rudd loses points for his lameness and descent into schmuckery, so I can't really say that he's a quality villain. He is really, really entertaining, and some more of those are coming up who are entertaining but lame. But that's why this one doesn't get quite up in the upper echelon. And I think I'm going to wrap this one up here. This is getting tougher and tougher and tougher. I am agonizing about some of these decisions because there are no bad episodes left. So I'm literally going, for example, just with the last two. Okay, which one do I think is better? Which one is more entertaining, the Diplomat or the Legend? I'm literally going like that and deciding in many cases as I go in order to make this list. Now we're up to the top 30, and it's going to be an absolute blast. I'm going to stop it here. I'll try and pick this up as soon as I can. I've got a lot of work to do this weekend, so it's probably not going to be until the middle of next week, but please stay tuned. Please like this video. Please subscribe to the channel so you get informed whenever new videos come up. And please leave your comments about the list so far and any other episodes. I will see you very, very soon next time I get an opportunity to make another list. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.